We did a survey of 1,000 woodworking companies. 80% of the companies we surveyed had no documented processes. That 80% struggle in that specific area. One thing I would say maybe I disagree with from traditional lean manufacturing continuous improvement.
Okay, everybody, welcome to another podcast. We are on the shop floor with Brad Cairns, and today I have a very special guest, Mr. Joseph Baggett. We haven't met in person until today, so we had to fly all the way across the country to actually meet in person, but I know that we've rapped back and forth a little bit on LinkedIn, and you always had really good comments on some of the stuff that I've been watching, and I'm like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. I think we got to get him on the show and help us woodworkers get straightened out. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, Brad. Everybody says what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Don't think that that's true anymore. And I would say I appreciate it, very humbled by your comments. I would tell people usually we know just enough to make people mad and be dangerous. So manage expectations on the front end, right?
So before we dive in, so this podcast that we're going to do is, they kind of wander a little bit, but the whole point of every podcast is with the intent of moving the needle for woodworking companies.
Absolutely.
To actually give them information that they can use. We don't want hypothetical stuff. We really just want everybody to be successful, to prove that this can be a successful industry. And so we're going to talk about the importance of standards today.
Yes.
And I'm super excited. You just spent, before the cameras were rolling, you just gave me the 10 minutes you're talking about. I got to get
turn it on.
It's like to get some of this stuff. So before we dive into some of that, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about where you come from.
Sure.
How'd you get here all the way to sitting in the chair right now?
Yeah. So I've been in the industry for about 30 years, and the company that my wife and I own now is called Innovative Wood Process Solutions, and we're a multinational consulting and engineering firm specifically geared towards the wood industry. I serve on the board of IWF. We've got well over 100 clients spread out all over the U.S. and in a few other countries. Hablo español para los que están escuchando en español.
That's really handy.
Yeah. So if you work in woodworking environments, eventually, it's going to come up, right? That said, I love this industry just like yourself. And about 5 years ago, we were really encouraged by some really important people in the industry to start this business for a multitude of reasons. And we continue to research, to understand, to share that knowledge. Our purpose, we don't have a mission statement, but our purpose statement is to inform, inspire, equip, and empower leaders in the wood industry to achieve the highest value. And that's what we're all about.
Awesome. And where would you say the most of your experience came from? Were you a woodworker at some point?
Yes.
Okay.
By however you want to call it, default. The first job that I had out of college was at a furniture factory, an office furniture factory. And on day one, I started and they said, hey, look, we bought an ERP system, and they put a manual about this thick on my desk. And they're like, here it is, figure it out, you implement it. And my first response to them was, I don't know how to make the office furniture here that you're making. I really need to learn how to make that office furniture first before I implement a software system that helps in the manufacture. And so I said, what I'd really like to do is go around and work in the plant and learn all of the jobs in the plant. I had never been exposed to lean manufacturing at this point, but just a young IE, industrial engineer, And so, for about 3 months, I learned how to weld chair frames and cut fabric and sew and glue up foam and fabric and upholster and assemble and finish. And after that, we started the ERP implementation, and I really realized that the factory had so much improvement to do. I still didn't want to do the ERP implementation. Obviously, much to my chagrin, I could not put that off any longer. But at that time was really introduced into lean manufacturing. The company that owned the office furniture owned a lot of other tier one automotive part supplier companies.
Ooh, that'd be handy.
And so, that was kind of my first baptism in continuous improvement. And I'm very thankful for that. And so over the years, whether it was setting up plywood factories or casket factories or cabinet factories or cabinet door factories, and then as a consulting and engineering firm, even other diverse wood products, the context for lean manufacturing and continuous improvement in a woodworking context has always been something that I've carried with me and attempted to be a lifelong learner and practitioner of.
Awesome. Well, I mean, it's one of those things, and we always tell people, like, once you can see waste, you can't unsee it now.
Nope.
So the first thing we do is apologize to everybody. We say, we're sorry, we're going to show you this thing, and now for the rest of your life, everything you see is going to be covered in waste, and it's up to you to not go crazy,
Sure.
but dig your way out. That's cool. Well, I mean, I'm glad you made that lifelong journey to end up sitting in this chair.
No, it's very exciting. Go
ahead.
No, I was just saying I think that our industry, as it continues to evolve, and when I say evolve, there are things that are happening. Since 2001, we've lost 32% of our companies, 38% of our employees. So that constriction continues on a regular basis. And that evolution, and that's really kind of a demographical, socio-economic, there's a lot of things that feed up into that. But there's a lot of those things that are demanding for understanding and efforts and application of continuous improvement and lean in the industry.
Right. And it's one of those businesses, and I don't get it, because the minute I saw it work, that was it. There was no turning back. There was no questioning it. There was all I needed was a glimpse. And I was like, oh my God, we have been doing woodworking the hard way for 30 years. This is insane. Let's start this lean manufacturing continuous improvement journey. And what's wrong with the rest of the woodworkers out there? Like, what percentage of woodworkers are actually doing this at even a moderate attempt? Like 2%?
So maybe we'll get closer to what we were going to talk about. We did a survey of 1,000 woodworking companies. In that survey, one of the questions is how well do you have documented processes in your manufacturing? How well do you follow them? Do you audit them? Do you use them? So about 80% of the companies we surveyed had no documented processes. This is no procedure posted, whatever you want to call it, digitized, something you can look up on your phone. There was no documented process to follow in manufacturing.
So 80% tribal knowledge.
Zero. Complete tribal knowledge.
Okay, and the balance?
So about 10% had some type of rudimentary system where they had some documented processes, not all. Some were followed, some were not. Just kind of in that range, right, between getting started. Yeah, we've got a few. They're in place. We use them. And then I would say the top 10% were responded. They did have documented processes. They were used. They were adhered to. They used them to improve. They used them to measure. They audited them. They changed them when equipment changed, when tooling changed, when coatings changed. And I would say one of the areas of the shop I say was probably the largest area that we saw that didn't have any processes was finishing. And so ironically, that's something our company is constantly contacted for. And so we tell people, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum of finishing, that if you want to do finishing well, that regardless of the scale, right, whether you're finishing a $100 a box cabinet or a $2,000 a box cabinet or a yacht interior or a table, right, a $30,000 dining table, it is 90% discipline and process and 10% skill. And whenever people look at what they come in and do every day in regards to finishing, that 80% struggle in that specific area probably more than in any other part of their shop.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that, you know, we are always preaching, but I don't think that money should be a dirty word.
No,
I think that profit should be one of the first things we talk about.
Of course.
And when you look at that demographic, in your opinion, the 80% struggling and the 10% that actually have standards, follow them,
yes,
update them, use them financially, from a financial aspect, who's struggling?
Well, I think it would be a somewhat obvious answer. Yeah. The difference between the two, the degree of difference in struggle is somewhat different. But I'll give you an example. There's one simple check when you're doing finishing is applying consistent wet film, right? So to get a certain level of quality, look, et cetera, you got to apply a certain amount of wet film. Usually the people in the 80% don't know how much they're applying. So over application can cause quality problems, but let's go back to your word that's no longer going to be a bad word, right? Money. Most often in the lack of measuring and maintaining a wet film build, what is happening is waste. The coating is being wasted. And if you buy, say $1 million a year of coatings, 1%, guess what? That's a lot of money. Yeah. Can I say that out loud? Yeah.
Up the tube.
Yeah. All over the place. All over the place. So
interesting. And so now, when we dive into creating standards, let's say, how do you, where would you, if someone doesn't have any standards in their whole factory, you're like, okay, we need to start doing this. You can't just shut down the factory and hire 3 full-time people to make standards. No. What's your recommendation on people getting going on getting some of this stuff documented?
Sure.
So when their older generation isn't there,
yeah,
they can teach it.
We'll talk about that in a minute. I would say what we encourage people to do is it's real easy to get lost in that. I come from an old quality system background, some ISO systems. I would say they're fairly complicated, and there was a large disillusionment with putting in a complicated system. Mm-hmm. Whether it was the documentation, whether it was keeping up with the documentation. That said, is to go back to this, if you're going to put in systems and processes, it's for the purpose of creating something that's valuable, not to show somebody something that looks good, right? And I think maybe you or somebody else mentioned, you have continuous improvement and you have continuous appearance. And so whatever the processes are, they have to be visible. They have to be understandable and meaningful, and the culture of the company has to have the ability to follow them and to use them. That said, what they physically look like is different. I'll tell you personally, I am all about digitizing those. It's much easier to maintain them, the automation of the processes. You can put a screen up where the work is being done. And if you want to make a change, you go to your computer, boom, it's changed everywhere. You can add videos, which obviously people like to do that now. But if you notice the context, if you work if you've ever worked in fast food, you've seen fast food, you work in other industries where people are performing a task with their hands that requires visual acuity of what they're doing, the accuracy of what they're doing. It's always in front of them, right? If you go inside, you see monitors, you see scanners, there's alarms, there's all of these things. And so there's not an answer for, hey, look, if you are doing this woodworking, here is one complete package that works for you.
Right. But one saying that's taken us a long way is you're not lean unless you're visual.
And I couldn't agree with that more. If you're expecting somebody to go dig something out of a drawer to follow something, it's not going to happen, right? That said, is that we have some clients that do have a really good job of implementing the processes of posting them and training them, and then the adherence of those. And that's where the culture comes in, is that who's going to address the elephant in the room, and that's usually where good intended processes sometimes are either come to a stop, they're hindered, is all of a sudden you've implemented a process, you've trained, you've looked at the results. One day, for whatever reason, they're not being followed, right? And they might be a good reason, right? There are good reasons. And so human nature, organizational culture that is light on discipline, their first reaction is, well, okay, today we had to change this because we run out of this material and we had to switch to this material, and we're going to have to sand extra on it. So that deviation becomes something that happened that day at that time to something that's now normal. That's right. And so when the material comes back in, you don't have to sand it extra, whatever else it is, right? Then that's become a normal part of the process. And so the engagement and the culture and the leadership and the trust of the leadership in the culture, even if you have great digitization, visualization, all those things, they have to be meaningful.
Yeah, and we're constantly warning people, like, when you do something that's not to standard, you've just created a new standard.
Of course.
So look out.
Yeah.
If you let that slide, because nobody likes conflict, right? So I just heard one of the best sayings from a good friend of mine, Paul Akers, was talking, and he said you have to be kind-hearted, strict, and caring, or fair. Kind-hearted, strict, and fair. And I heard that, and I was like, oh, I just felt so much better knowing that strict was in there. Like you do have to be strict, because, I mean, let's face it. Look at all the most successful companies. We're gonna look at McDonald's, Apple. Like, how would you feel if your Big Mac tasted different? They wouldn't be in business.
No.
And if they had a binder on a shelf for some kid, 15 years old, to make a hamburger, it's over. The minute those manuals are in a binder and on a shelf, and at my company, we take this to the extreme. For our machinery division, we don't make manuals.
Perfect.
And that's what I said. I'm like, we have 4 CNC routers back there with umpteen other machines and all these binders on a shelf that just collect dust. And when we have a problem, we still don't get out that binder.
No.
And so what we did to overcome that was we just created videos and QR codes for everything.
It's perfect.
And you scan the QR code. Everyone has one of those phones glued to their head. Boom, scan, watch, done, carry on.
And I would say, I'm very encouraged to hear the story. I can't wait to visit your facility. But whatever it is that works for the location and the type of people that are performing those tasks, right? And I mean, obviously, whenever it comes to that point of, okay, let's say, like in your shop, you look at that and you say, okay, look, I don't understand this. At that point, do they say, hey, can you help me with this to understand this? Because I don't want to deviate from what's going on here. That's like gold, right? And that's an issue of culture. So I would tell people no business can outperform its culture. And if people trust you, go back to your statement that you had from the gentleman that you alluded to. You had to be kind-hearted, strict and caring. Yeah, fair, and fair. Zinger Miller had a great thing called the basic principle, said, focus on the situation, issue, or behavior, and not the person. And if people trust you to say, hey, look, I'm trying to follow this process. I don't have the tools. I don't understand. it's not in my language, whatever the issue is, that culture will have the highest aptitude and possibility of following the processes that are in place.
And you know, it's funny, we are constantly, everyone I talk to, we put in that chair, regardless of what we're talking about, there's all of these subjects, but they all have a tie right back to the people.
Yes.
Every single time. And I'll quote my friend Michael, he says, it's all about the people.
Yeah, I was just saying, one of the parts is why is this so important? So we can go from the money word, right? Our new good word, not bad word, right? And this is something, while in itself, sometimes people have difficulty bringing to consciousness doubt and fear about the value of implementing standards and using them. They're not shiny. They're not fun. They're not something, that you get written up in magazines or take pictures and everything. That said, as we began to transition, you can look at COVID, you can look at all kinds of things. More and more, they are going to move from something that is seemingly a luxury to something that's required.
Right.
At the same time, it's two things. They do bring value. They bring just as much value as any other investment, whether it's in hard assets, software, and they're the building block of what really makes the rest of a continuous improvement system work.
Absolutely. I would probably put them ahead of all of those things.
Yeah.
Like you can get yourself quite a ways down the road before you need to call me and get a sanding robot, if you have good standards and good, you know what I mean? Like that, like you said, we can go back 100 years. Henry Ford says, standardization is just the best we know today, but not tomorrow.
No, maybe we'll just make a quick mention about sanding. In a lot of woodworking shops, it's so ambiguous about how much sanding is needed, what sanding is needed, what grit do you use. You have all those variables, and so there's so many rejects. There's so many reworks that are made either by improper sanding or somebody sits there and sands forever. Because if the longer you sand, the better it is. But maybe the more money you lose. I don't know. It's just so arbitrary, and we can pick on that. You can pick on all kinds of other parts of the shop. But if you look at money in a sustainable, scalable model, quickly it's moving away from a luxury to a necessity. So this past year, we had 5 companies, $30 to $7 million companies that contacted our company and said, we want to put in a quality system because we have the ability to sell and to market into higher sales ASP levels in the market. We have to be able to consistently produce a product that meets those expectations.
Right.
So it's both good news, but it's also moving from luxury to requirement. You
don't have to go far in almost any business that I've ever been involved in. It's the boring work that needs to get done. It's the not shiny stuff. It's the not exciting stuff. But when you get those things in place, they facilitate the shiny stuff.
Of course.
But without them, you can't get anywhere. No
Without a doubt.
No Kaizen, right?
Yeah, and I would say if you look at our industry average age at the end of 2022 was 48. The average age of general industry is 38. And so we have clients that in their manufacturing organization have an average age of 57 or more. Right. So maybe not no standards, no Kaizen, but no standards and the old guy dies and nobody knows how to do the work anymore. Right.
No standards, no work.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Well, so, wow. Now, what about, let's say we're the average shop. We gave it a good college try. We got our standards. We got some stuff written up. We got them on the wall. And for the first week, everyone was kind of following them. And then it tapers off. Like what can we do to shore that up, or how do you shore that up?
Sure. So I'll steal shamelessly. Bo Lewis, the people at Al Moxie did something really cool here a while back, and one of the vehicles that they used in their organization to drive the culture is that they incentivized the thinking and the behavior that they felt would bring about the culture that they wanted. So you have traditional incentive programs, bonuses, perfect attendance, productivity, whatever you want to hook it to. And if you're looking at culture, I would say one of the best things you can do is set aside time and then incentivize the things that are going to change the thinking and the behavior. And maybe it's not, hey, you made 100 parts today, you get a bonus or an incentive. But here is the thinking and the behavior. And it looks different in every organization. And so how much in these organizations do we praise people for following processes, for finding problems, for incorporating solutions? How much, I'll say from my company standpoint, how much technical expertise do we pour into them that they actually have the background and the context to understand the science about what they're doing? And those type of things will help drift.
Right.
And I would say emotionally, if you treat it like you bought $1 million machine and a week later you weren't using it anymore, guess what?
You figure it out.
But also treat it, there's positive way. Everything can be argued from the positive or the negative, right? Write a 5-year success story and a 5-year failure story for your company. What is going to drive that? Like it would be published in a local newspaper or, an industry periodical. And live from those assumptions, but then drive the communication and what your company spends time about, talks about, from those assumptions. Sometimes we ask a client what their average age is. They don't know. They have to go count everybody and divide it, right? And some it's right on the tip of their tongue. So in that study we did of 1,000 companies, statistically, and this is basically a year old, in the next 5 to 10 years, the majority of the experience, the tribal knowledge, in the shop will leave the industry for one reason or another. So pretend like you got a 5 to 10 year window to transfer all of that critical knowledge.
Right. And so, I love how it keeps circling back, but it's not necessarily like the proverbial whip cracking to get people to follow standards. It's more about, do you have a culture that believes in standards, that understands standards, that knows the importance of those standards, and knows how critical it is to follow them. Not that it's, we're trying to, you can't do the job, so we're trying to control your every movement. It's more along the lines of, hey, this is, we all understand that if we're all doing the same thing, then we can improve.
Of course. And I would say, I'll go from preaching to meddling now, but traditionally our industry has not done well culturally at sharing knowledge. If people gain knowledge, they used it as a way to get bonuses, raises, push people out of a job. If they ever did freely share the knowledge, then sometimes they were penalized for sharing that knowledge. And so your culture has to be one that highly encourages, incentivizes all of the above sharing knowledge. So I would say a contemporary application that we had a client and they had a big bottleneck in upholstery. And so we relayed out the upholstery area. We started developing procedures. They figured out that they had to hire about 12 upholsterers. And in this area, furniture is very old, and they're like, man, where are we going to get 12 upholsterers from, right? And they realized that no longer they were competing with furniture manufacturers around. They were competing with Chick-fil-A. And
for people.
Yeah. So how are you going to turn Chick-fil-A's got a great company, got a great culture, right? But how are you going to turn one of those people into an upholsterer, right? And in a reasonable amount of time. So what they did is they actually incentivized, with our guidance, their veteran upholsterers to train new upholsterers. And in this incentive program, basically they gave them a period of time to train someone to get up to speed, to be able to produce at a certain rate. They were not only penalized, they were praised, they were incentivized, et cetera, to share knowledge. During that time, guess what? They got the standards up, they got the training videos up, and the veterans didn't feel threatened, and they have a much more scalable, sustainable model. No fear, right? And now they realize, okay, sharing this knowledge, right, standardizing it and sharing it is something we got to do in every part of our manufacturing operation.
Yeah, a must. And something I notice is I'm traveling to other companies. I go to some of my friends' companies, like you go to Fast Cap and you see Paul's operation.
Yeah.
You go to Yellow Tools and you see Michael's operation, and you go to Seating Matters in Ireland and you're like, oh my God, and one thing that I noticed is that I'm like, why, when I look around, they have beautiful standards posted everywhere, and everything is just looks wonderful. And I go back to my shop, and I can't for the life of me make it happen. And we realized quickly, all of these guys have graphic designers on their team. They have these, they just have the ability to make these beautiful documents. And then we're like, oh my God, if that's it. So I don't even know if you know, but we've created all of these tools online now, so the average woodworker can go on and like hammer out these SOPs, and updating them is as critical as creating them.
Of course,
because we get fired up. They're going to hear this podcast. Everyone's going to go and they're going to start making standards all over their shop, not realizing that I promise you have to redo that standard 10 times.
Of course.
Before it's right, because you're not going to think of it, and someone's going to follow it, and if you don't redo it, what happens? That thing's dead in the water.
Of course.
If you can't rely on it, well, we don't do it that way, we do it this way. Standard's not right. Standard's over.
Well, and I would say whether the standard's right or not, one thing I would say maybe I disagree with from traditional lean manufacturing continuous improvement is sometimes it proposed that people performing operations functions, factory jobs were experts in their jobs. And there is science, there is chemistry in finishing. There's wood science. Bill Young, that works with our company, has a master's degree in wood science. When you dry wood, there is science and there is technique. If you ever want to talk tooling, we can do another podcast on tooling. There is science in the application of tooling. And so being able to pour that into people when they do their job is just really important. And then being able to standardize that information, valuable, usable, where people see and understand it. And I love the beauty part of it as well. I would say if that's something that's big for you, outsource it, right? There are people that will come in and help you make a beautiful. We do. I'm not a graphic designer. Nobody in we can tell you about the cellular structure of, hard maple or how to cut it up and use it. We don't make sexy presentations or. Documentation.
I've even told my guys in the past, I'm like, do you have a Sharpie and a piece of cardboard?
Sure.
That's what we need here. Just put it up on the wall, write the 5 steps that you're going to follow over and over again, and one day we'll get around to making that sign pretty, but more importantly, we always live by the principle where the question is, the answer should be. So I don't want to look for things, I don't want to search for things, I want the answer there, and if it's in your head and it's not out on the wall, let's just get it out first. We'll make it pretty later.
No, I go back to what within that people group that's working in the factory, what works for them. Yeah. That is visualization is pretty universal. However, wherever it is.
Spanish picture looks just like an English picture.
It does.
Can't deny it.
No, that's pretty important. I want to go back to a point we made of why is this not always high on the list? There's all kinds of reasons. It's not fun. It's not sexy. Sometimes it's seemingly untangible. But I'll make a statement here. Traditionally, the woodworking industry has relied on buying new machinery and automated machinery, and they've trusted ourselves, to make those investments to ultimately solve problems and drive improvements. While I don't want to be a hypocrite, in the last 30 years, it's somewhere north of $400 million of woodworking machinery we've been responsible for specifying and installing. I love that part, not telling people to stop buying machines. We did a similar study through the NICIS. From 2019 to 2022, the wood industry put in about $3 billion of woodworking machinery, automation, software, all the above, right, and real assets. During that same period, the productivity, the actual labor content and hours per unit of what was being produced all together for the major NACIS codes, that productivity actually went down.
Wow.
There's a lot of things that needs to be qualified with a few things. During COVID, there was this huge demand for furniture, cabinets, all kind of. It was this big spike, and so that spike in investment really helped deal with the demand for those products. So, don't want to pronounce unfair judgment on the industry as a whole. And so the next 3-year roll of that data will kind of prove out during more normal conditions what that looked like. But in those graphical trends, you had the largest investment in automation in the industry in its history, and we didn't become more productive. And so at a general level, our faith to be able to create value through machinery and automation is evident in one way or the other. So I want to give some grace because during COVID, it was hard to hire people, hard to get people to come to work, all those type of things. That say is if you look at the average age, you look at so many other things that are affecting the industry, I would encourage us to trust ourselves to make improvements, starting with standardizing our processes and following a process every single day. If you have great processes and great culture, you've got something truly valuable. You put automated machinery in a context like that, it's going to be really successful.
I think you just nailed it. I kind of want to just stop right there. I want to say, well, yeah, I mean, get your standards first, get your culture first, and then, it's almost like analogous to if you wanted to be a bodybuilder, like going to the gym is only a third of it. Like you've got to eat right, you got to sleep right, and you got to go to the gym. So it's the same thing with a company. You can't buy your way out, and you can't buy a culture.
No.
And so that in of itself is probably the big project for people, is to say, hey, how do we get this culture that's going to help us not only create the standards, but to continue to follow them and understand why we're doing that. Like, why are these guys running around with their hair on fire talking about standards all the time? I don't get it. I know my job. And it's like, yeah, but you're still a human being. We all are.
We all are. We all leak.
Yeah.
We all leak.
That's right.
as much as you try to remember and process, we all leak. And that's why I love doing podcasts. It's why I love talking to people. Some people are like, hey, we've heard it all before. Well, you know what? That's true. But we haven't heard it in the context of an aging industry, a shrinking industry. All those things deserve for those same principles to be understood in the context that we are and will be in. So the idea that hey, this is temporary is not true. There's so much demographical data that show the contrary. So just project and since 2001, the shrinking of the industry by EIN numbers and employees, that's not done. and it's unfortunate. There's a lot of other things that go into that equation, but as those things continue, I would tell you that being able to create and standardize processes will leverage all the other efforts within the organization to create value.
And I mean, we can wrap this up. Everybody's been listening for probably 40 minutes or so, but
And why did you talk so long?
Yeah, I was the long-winded one. So it's no longer a matter of, I have to create standards to be successful. We're quickly approaching, I have to create standards to survive.
We are. And some people are closer to that than others. So just because maybe it's easier, that's great. But how long? And for how long? And with whom?
Man, amen to that. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap up another podcast of On the Shop Floor. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Brad. That's great.
I think this was great. And what's the basis of training? Repeat, repeat, repeat. I know you guys have all heard this before. Make standards, create standards, follow standards. But, we're of the age now where we're past critical.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Brad.
Last, this wraps up one more On the Shop Floor.
Awesome.